I think in the face of an event like this pandemic, we have two options. We can either chaotically flail, or we can actually pivot, like we're talking about. And I think in order to effectively make that turn, we have to anchor to purpose. So there was a notion, we were responding to the pandemic for a while, but now organizations need to realize we need to shift to evolving operations for this new world that we have in front of us. And so the organizations that have been stuck in, you know what, we're just going to push through this, things are going to go back to how they were. Those are the organizations that I think are struggling in making this pivot.
Hi everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of All About HR. My name is Nelly, and on today's episode I speak with Tim Creasey. Tim is the Chief Innovation Officer at Prosci, and our conversation was all around change. What's HR's role in change? How can HR drive change? How important is it in today's environment? And what's the role of the new hybrid way of working that a lot of organizations are moving towards to? We talked about this and a lot more, and all against the background of this overarching topic, change. Go check out the episode yourself. But before you do so, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and like this video. Bye. Welcome to another episode of All About HR. Hi there, Tim, and welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing great. Great to be here, and thank you for having me, Nelly.
Yeah, very happy to have you, Tim, and also very happy to finally get to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, this is one of those that we were playing a little bit of calendar gymnastics with, so I'm glad we landed it finally.
Yeah, me too. Before we get started, Tim, perhaps you can tell our listeners a little bit about who you are, what you do, and also a little bit more about Prosci.
Yeah, so my name is Tim Creasey, the Chief Innovation Officer at Prosci. We are a change management firm, so our focus is how do we help individuals and organizations build their own capabilities to deliver more successful outcomes in times of change. The phrase I like to use is helping people unlock the challenges of change. That's really what lights my fire. And what we've found over a couple of decades of research is that there's things you can do right and things you can definitely do wrong when it comes to helping people adopt and use whatever the solution is that we're trying to bring forward in the organization. So as a firm, we provide training and advisory services and research and collaborative online tools, all aimed at equipping practitioners to help manage the people side, whatever change effort they're trying to bring forward.
Interesting. And so, Tim, have you always been interested in change?
So here's what I've always been interested in, is what makes people tick. So I actually got into school as a mechanical engineer, but before I set foot in university, I realized I really enjoyed human systems much more than technical systems. So my studies went down the path of economics and political science, because I thought both of those disciplines helped us understand what made people do what they did. So that was always been what kind of intrigued me. I actually had no desire to go into the business world. I had a PhD lined up to go do in comparative economics, and then I was going to teach political economics. But I ended up landing a job. My partner, she was my girlfriend at the time in college. Now she's the mother of my children and partner in life. But she was doing a teaching degree, so it was going to take her a little bit longer to get out of school than I was going to take. So I landed this job at Prosci alongside the research function to really understand the human dynamics of change and what makes people step forward and lean into a change and what makes people question and step out of a change. So I kind of describe it, if macroeconomics is how the whole economy works and microeconomics is how a firm makes decisions, this is microeconomics. How does a person decide I'm going to lean in to start using that new learning management system? I'm going to lean into that career path. I'm going to lean into this new hybrid workplace, or I'm going to retreat and not engage with that change. That's microeconomics, what makes people tick. And so that's really what's always fascinated me. And in the discipline of change management, we get to use that notion to help people, projects, and organizations be more successful. So
fascinating. I have to admit that I would love to dive into so many of these things that you touched on, and we are going to try to do that as much as possible a little bit later in our conversation, Tim. But before we do so, perhaps for our listeners, it's good to take a step back. And especially for those of us, including me, who aren't necessarily very used to how change happens, or how change maybe happened before the pandemic and how it happens now. So perhaps we can start with that. How did change traditionally happen? And then I'm especially interested in how it happened in agile organizations, because I believe here we have something like vertical versus horizontal change. And you've been, I think, very familiar with this concept for quite a while already. So maybe we can start with that.
So if we were think about a coin, there's two sides of the coin, right? And change is like that coin. Change has always and will always have two sides of the coin. There's a technical side of the coin. How do we design, develop, and deliver the solution to meet the issue or opportunity in front of us? And then there's the people side of the coin. How do we ensure that people engage, adopt, and use the solution we brought forward? So every change for all of time has had both of those sides of the coin. What was interesting over the last several 20, 30 years, and really why I think change management emerged as a discipline, is shifting value systems within the organization. Now, you think about that people side of the coin. In an old value structure of consistency and control and predictability, when an employee was asked to jump, their answer was, how high? The people side of change, because of the value system and the behaviors we incented and rewarded, the people side of change was really just telling people what you needed them to do. You've seen this evolution over the last 20, 30 years around empowerment and accountability and ownership and really bringing people into the organization. Now, when we go to ask them to jump, their first response is not how high. That's not the behavior we want. We want them engaged and saying, well, why should I jump? How does jumping help my customer? How does it help me and my team? We want them engaged, but at the same time, that raised the bar in terms of how we actually engage them in times of change. So that's where I think over the evolution of this focus on the people side of change and why it matters. I think agile organizations, that's kind of flipping the coin back over to look at the technical side of the coin. I think the interesting thing is iterative project management has about a 70-year history. So the project management community began chunking work down into meaningful bite-sized pieces a long time ago. Over the last 20 years, we really saw it come into vogue coming out of the software space. But the notion that if I can shorten the cycle where I'm trying to make change, I can be more attuned to what's happening now and what's coming ahead, that makes a lot of sense. It's harder. It takes more energy and effort. It takes different muscles in the system. And I think one of the fascinating things that's come out of the pandemic is iterative change by necessity, right? Right, Nayli? Like everything became iterative because we didn't know what was around the corner. We have no idea what's going to happen in 4 weeks from now and 8 weeks from now. We're in the midst of another news cycle about another shift in the way the world is handling a global pandemic. So we can't look 5 years down the road anymore like we used to. For a while, we were looking 5 minutes down the road, 5 days down the road. That has lifted, I think. But I think organizations involuntarily built the capability to change in a more rapid way. And I think that'll be fascinating to watch play out over the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's very true there is what you're saying about how the success horizons as well for organizations, they have shrunk.
Can I share with you an analogy we use internally at Prosci? Because I think you're spot on here. We use the idea of a compass. And to be able to say 5 years out, we're going to be going 17.2 degrees, that's nonsense. That's 5 years out. So what we can do is say 5 years out, we want to be between 15 and 20 degrees. We know generally that's the direction we want to go. In the next 3 years, let's try to get it around the 17. And this year, let's hone in on 17.2 degrees on that compass. Because this year, I know where I'm going. But to try to make commitments 5 years out to 17.2 degrees is nonsense. And so there's the notion of compass, right? How focused we are. And then what you introduced just now is that notion of refresh rate. How quickly are we reorienting to where we are and where we're going? And so this to me is, this is agility in the muscle of the organization. So
Absolutely. And this is also something, Tim, I think we spoke about when we chatted before we recorded today's episode. This is this difference between an organization reacting to what's happening and now we're going to reimagining, right? And I think this is what you also mentioned, that that's where a lot of organizations are right now.
I think, yeah, that's the journey that each organization and each leader is going to be going through, is how do we pivot from simply responding to a pandemic until it's over, which I think was the mindset, right? In March 2020, when we sent out our email that we were closing down physical headquarters, we said, 6 to 8 weeks, we'll be back in. We'll all be back together, right? So there was a notion we were responding to the pandemic for a while, but now organizations need to realize we need to shift to evolving operations for this new world that we have in front of us. And so the organizations that have been stuck in, we're just going to push through this, things are going to go back to how they were. Those are the organizations that I think are struggling in making this pivot. Now, at Prosci, we didn't have the luxury to do that because we were an in-person training business. I think in the face of an event like this pandemic, we have two options. We can either chaotically flail, or we can actually pivot like we're talking about. And I think in order to effectively make that turn, we have to anchor to purpose. One of the things I still can't believe, and I'm probably be the most proud of professionally, is that on March 10th, 2020, we delivered our last in-person program. And 1 week later, on March 17th, we delivered our first ever virtual program. And it was through a tremendous effort by a huge, coordinated, dedicated team. But it was all anchored to how do we help practitioners feel more equipped to tackle the change in front of them. And so I think that pivoting around who we are as a team, as an individual, as a program, that's how we maintain the focus we need to navigate this crazy world we got in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, I heard this example before, of course, but I still find it so impressing how in only 7 days you managed to completely turn around the way you delivered the training, and basically you completely turned around your entire business, right?
It was surreal, right? One of the neat things we realized is you have to maintain that wow factor, right? One of the interesting things as soon as training went virtual, though, is do you know how long it took me to jump into a class that was underway? 2 seconds to click on a link and jump into the virtual classroom where this class was taking place. So there was one day, it was early on in the pandemic, probably June of 2020. I started doing cameos where I would drop in on a program because it takes me 2 seconds to drop in. And I get to come in and talk to the practitioners and tell them, thank you for stepping into this important work, right? Thank you for stepping into a discipline that helps your projects be more successful. Thank you on behalf of your organization. The muscle to out change is critical, but most importantly, thank you on behalf of all the people in your organization who are going to experience better change when you bring this capability to life. So I would drop in, say hello, answer a couple of questions. I had one Thursday where I started my day pretty early on my side of the pond with a class in Europe that was wrapping up the end of their day two. For the course of the day, I dropped into 11 different programs, and I finished my day, at the end of my day, dropping into the next day in Australia where they were starting day 3 of the program. So 11 drop-ins, about 180 change practitioners around the world that I got to say thank you to. And that's because time and place got really squishy, right? Everywhere became anywhere as a result of this pandemic, which meant I could jump into any of these classrooms in 2 seconds rather than flying 16 hours across the globe to drop into that class that was happening in Australia. And I think the leaders of our organizations can realize that there's some opportunities that have been provided to us as a part of this involuntary digital transformation, right? We were all together. We all had to go to a part and figured it out, but we're not all coming back to together. But over the course of the last couple of years, we've built some new capabilities, some new competencies. We built some new trust. We built some new courage to try new things. And so while the landscape of change looks, there's a lot on it. At the same time, we're stepping into new opportunities to drive more successful change with these capabilities we have in front of us.
I want to continue on that for a second, Tim, if that's okay with you, because these kind of questions that present themselves now, who in the organization, in your opinion, should think about these questions and reflect on them and find an answer?
It's a fascinating and kind of loaded question because, and not loaded in a bad way, because we're watching organizations navigate this right now. The who should be thinking about it, this is where I think senior leaders need to step up. And I keep writing my love letter to Brene Brown about how the reimagining of the workplace is going to take huge amounts of bravery by senior leaders, huge amounts of bravery by leaders to say, you know what is now totally possible because we proved it was. We're going to go ahead and embrace that and continue to trust our employees, to continue to foster individual flexibility, to continue to encourage better integration and balance and wellness in our organization. And it's going to take bravery to embrace a new hybrid workplace when we have the opportunity to potentially rush back to what was. So I think there's a huge piece of bravery that sits right here in terms of this navigation back. I've been trying to call this the vocation location, right? Where does work get done? Is the vocation location. And who's making the decision is one of the most fascinating things we're watching organizations decide on. Some organizations are letting the individual employee make the decision. Some are letting it be made by teams, maybe a manager in their team, a department, a division. In some organizations, we're getting enterprise-wide decisions. But that scope of who makes the decision has significant impacts, I think, in terms of the employee experience and in the opportunity for the organization to tap into what is possible, right? We were working with one client and they did all this amazing analysis. They took every job role and they looked at the suitability of the role to be done in a hybrid manner and the ability of that person, right? Is that person qualified? So job suitability, qualified, how qualified the individual is to work hybrid. Every job gets plotted in. And in the end, then they let each manager make their own decision for their team. So you get this beautiful set of analysis, but now we're working with two teams. Both teams have essentially the same job roles. They've scored pretty much the same way in terms of where the job should be done. One manager's bought into hybrid work, the other one hasn't. And you end up with some really interesting inequity challenges around vocation location. So yeah, I don't know that anybody has this figured out yet in terms of who and how we're going to bring to life the hybrid workplace.
Tim, there's one other thing I'm really, really, really impatient to ask you about in this regard, and that is, of course, the role. How do you see the role of HR in this? Because I think what happened since the start of the pandemic is that everybody all of a sudden watched to HR as the as those who would have all the answers, and all eyes on them. And I think that's still very much the case as we are now transitioning into a hybrid model or not. So, how do you see their role?
Yeah, I think to me, this is like the opportunity for HR to be that strategic partner that they've always asked and said they wanted to be. The pandemic elevated the importance of the human beings that make up our organization. It brought new levels of connectedness across the human beings that make up our organization. It's created all kinds of new ripples and challenges in terms of the ability to waltz between being a human being with a life and being an employee in this organization and realizing that those are the same thing at the same time. And so, I think it makes a ton of sense that HR was looked to as we began responding to the pandemic. And I think this is HR's opportunity to step into being the strategic guide to helping reimagine what the organization can be.
I can imagine that also asks from HR a certain ability to then guide people through a period of change.
Absolutely. And it's something that hasn't happened all that often, right? I actually put a post on this on LinkedIn right after you and I had our initial conversation to get ready for this podcast, because I think it's really easy to forget about adoption and usage and how to prepare, equip, and support your people when the change is actually about people. So if we're rolling out a new accounting system, everybody says, oh, well, you got to help people understand why and build awareness and desire. And you need to answer what's in it for them, help them understand the personal motivators, the organizational motivators. But then we roll out a new learning system for folks. And we say, hey, everybody, there's a new learning system. It's so great. We completely ignore the fact that even though we think that new learning system is going to be the best thing since sliced bread, people still have an adoption and usage journey. They are still trying to decide how much energy to put into that change versus all the other stuff they have going on. And so Agile falls into the same trap, right? When we bring user stories into how we design solution, we can get lazy about actually putting in the energy to drive adoption and usage of the solution. And in the same way, when the change focuses on people, we can forget about the people side of change. I did a fun keynote actually just about a month ago for a global multinational food and beverage. And it was all their top leaders in learning and development. And we titled the talk, Change is Learning, Learning is Change. Because too often when we try to bring learning into the organization, we don't think about it as a change that we can bring proper change management to. And we see the same thing happen in a lot of people-focused HR changes, for sure.
One thing that then immediately comes to mind when I hear you talk about that, Tim, is so, when it's easy to forget about people, when the change is about people, then how can we make sure that we don't forget about that? Do you have maybe an example or maybe some tips that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the essence of a structured change management methodology. Let's use that LMS. And I'm going to pull forward Daryl Connor as one of the great grandfathers of change management. And he offered up this language about 15 years ago about the gap between installation and realization. And I'm sure many on this call, probably on this listening to the podcast, might think of examples where we installed the learning management system, but we did not realize the value of our people growing like we thought we did, right? So that's kind of that gap that good change management will help us fill. So if I were to take even kind of the Prosci core 3-phase methodology, the neat thing that we did in the methodology in 2021 when we enhanced it is we added what we call plain language questions to help make the methodology real accessible for people that don't necessarily have a neuroscience PhD, right? So the first is, why are we changing? So what is the reason for change? What are the objectives of the initiative? And what's the organizational benefit and gain? So why are we changing with this new learning management system? Because we know it's important to help our people grow. They are our most valuable asset. There's all sorts of new competencies and capabilities that people need to hone right now. And we've got this really effective way to get learning to people. So that would be the why we're changing. The second question we ask is, who has to do their job differently and how when this system comes live? And we will take you through 10 aspects of somebody's job that may or may not be impacted by the change. And what we do is we say, does it and how does it impact their, and I'm going to go through them kind of quick, ready? Their processes, their systems, their tools, their job role, their critical behaviors, mindsets, attitudes, and beliefs, compensation, performance review, reporting structure, location. So those are 10 aspects of my job that may or may not be impacted by this learning management system. So I would take different audiences of the organization and say, if they really are going to be successful in getting the value out of this new LMS, how is it going to impact their processes, their systems, their tools, their job roles, and so forth? Because it's not just turning it on. It's not just that the buttons work. It's that the person shows up in a new way and makes learning part of what it is they want to do and how they contribute to the organization. Then the third question we would ask is, what's it going to take to help our people adopt and use this change when we bring it forward? And so we would look at risks. We would look at the different roles that are involved. We had realized that from the research, the employees do not care what the head of learning has to say about this at all. All the rest of the employees in the organization care zero what the head of learning has to say about this. They're out on the floor building stuff. They want to know what their manager and what the person who's running the floor has to say. And so a good change management, as we think through what's it going to take as we prepare our approach, we look at the risk, we look at the roles, we look at the resources, we would do some road mapping. So you would say, okay, if here's the day we want them to start using the new LMS, that's when they have the ability to use it. When am I going to provide them the knowledge? How am I going to build the desire before that? And when am I going to start building the awareness of the need that they need to start using this new system? So that's how we would kind of tee it up front. And then out of that, we would come up with a whole set of these plans and activities to help people be able to say, I understand why we have this LMS. I decided to use this LMS. I know how to use it. I'm able to use it, and I'm going to keep using it.
While I heard you talking, Tim, I do see a lot of opportunities here, I think, for HR to jump in and facilitate this process. What this looks like then in practice.
HR is an interesting place for change management to sometimes live and sometimes not live. I've watched many of my clients where there's a bit of a turf battle that emerges because change management, we know in its core, is about how do we help this project capture the people-dependent project ROI. So in a lot of my clients, I'll see the project management office, IT, strategy transformation pick up change management as a discipline we align to those most important projects. HR sometimes has struggled, again, because they have struggled to think about the change they do as projects, and then have sometimes struggled with this notion of aligning the structure and intent to those initiatives. We have some clients, though, where the HR business partner is probably the most celebrated, important change agent in the organization because they really set at that intersection of strategy and direction of the organization and the pulse of the people in a specific part of the organization. So we'll see HR business partners often become these allies, these change agents. The other place I see HR starting to show up is this realization that change management, it's both a structured process we apply to the new LMS to build the strategies and plans to drive adoption of the LMS, but it's also a mindset and skill set. It's viewing change as unlockable. It's seeing the moving parts that make up a change. If I'm a senior leader, it's internalizing my role as a sponsor of change. And the research has told us abundantly clearly that means you need to actively and visibly participate, build coalitions of support, and communicate directly. So that senior leader has to internalize and build the skills of being a great sponsor in times of change. And I think HR is a great partner in terms of organizations starting to build up that capability and that skill set. So
now, I'm not trying to play the devil's advocate here, but I think I have this sense that a lot of people tend to be quite risk and or change averse often. As soon as there's a change, people tend to be like, oh no, what is this? I'm not sure if I want to change, etc. So I was wondering, where do you feel then this shift has come from?
this shift toward
That mindset change of like, okay, so we go from how do I jump to why do I jump?
I do think there's this economic history about evolving from an agricultural through an industrial, through a knowledge, through a service, to an interaction economy, which I think is the next wave of the economy. But I think what also is happening is there's this tailwind of revaluing the human beings that make up the organization. I think it's actually a bi-directional relationship between the organization and the employee and the organization. Both directions of that relationship have shifted over the last 2-3 decades. But in 2014, one of my best friends and I were starting to put together a podcast that we never got off the ground called Rehumanization of the Workplace. But what we were identifying was and it wasn't one of these rah, like rehumanize the workplace. It was observational that we were watching a bunch of trends in organizations that all were the similar thread of those trends was revaluing the human being that makes up the organization. That I'm placing a higher value on each of the people that are part of this organization. So things like wellness, inclusion, mindfulness, meditation, even all of our design thinking practices are symptomatic of revaluing the human being that makes up the organization. Because there was a time when this was the value I provided, right? Was just physical motion. But now each of the people I think we're valuing them more for their unique contribution as a person to our goal as a collective organization in a really neat way. We never got the webinar off or the podcast off the ground, but I think we're seeing even more of it in the face of the pandemic. All of us are human beings navigating our own journeys, and we're working together as part of this organization. So
I think what I also like to ask you is, I mean, you're not an an HR person, so it's actually kind of exciting that I get to ask you as an outsider about things that have to do with HR. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what, in your opinion, is the biggest cliche that exists about HR?
The biggest cliche about HR. I think the biggest cliche I often hear is, I think both change management and HR get a bit of this. The soft side of change. We've got all these process, operations, equipment. That's the hard side of the organization. But then we've got the soft side of the organization. I'll tell you what, you try to do a big merger, there's technical complexity getting the systems to work together. The hard side of change is getting people to step into and show up in a new way. And so I think that's the biggest cliche that I think both HR and change management run into, is this misconception that because we are squishy, the people side of change is the soft side of change. But oh no, it's by far the much harder side of change.
Now, on to my favorite part of the episode, where I get to ask my lovely guests about an epic win and an epic fail. So, Tim, I'm not sure with which one you want to start, but please.
All right, so I'm going to start with you, my epic fail. My epic fail this week was saying yes to something I should have said no to. And I've been working really hard over the years to get better at saying no to stuff. And we were introduced this year to some language at our executive team about what we call the hidden cost of saying yes. And too often we say yes to stuff and it ends up on our calendar without ever having calculated the hidden cost, not only to ourselves, but maybe to our family, maybe to other teams, maybe to other departments that we have to end up collaborating with. And so I've been working really hard to be more thoughtful of the hidden cost of saying yes. And last week I said yes to something I should have said yes to. So that was my epic fail, was letting a no that I should have said slip by.
Can we go on to your epic win now then?
Yeah, so my epic win, at the beginning of each year as an organization, we have an all hands company-wide meeting where we pull everybody together. And we always try to get a client to come speak at that. This year, Prosci refreshed our values, and we put out our 6 values, and each of them have a neat we statement behind it. And one of those values, the very top one, is impact. And the we statement is, we are proud of the people we are, the work we do, and the difference we make. So in my support of this meeting, I was finding the client or customer to come speak on behalf of, to come speak to our employees about the impact that we've had. So I had a call with a gentleman, and he's luckily going to be the one that comes and speaks to us. And he said, Tim, this is how the way he introduced the call. ADCAR has changed how we grant wishes to kids. That's an epic win right there. I mean, it's a 5-letter model that we've been teaching for years that just gives people a way to see change as unlockable. And yet they were able to bring it to life in a nonprofit organization that provides kids hope. About as epic win as it gets. And then he's going to come tell his story to our company as part of our yearly kickoff meeting. So that was my big epic win, was not only getting to hear his story, but having the honor to get to bring his story to all the rest of the company.
That is a pretty epic win indeed, Tim, I would say. What a great way to open the call that you had with him. Well, on his side, then, of course, a great opening from his side. So yeah, that's a beautiful one. Congratulations on that one.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it's the one that still makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck, right?
Yeah, definitely. Even me, and I'm not even involved directly, but I can definitely imagine how it must have felt for you. So that's a very nice one. Tim, I want to give you a huge thank you for joining me today on this episode of All About HR. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for joining us.
It was absolutely my pleasure. And yeah, if we were able to offer any listeners one key to help unlock the challenges of change in front of them, then I think we did our job. So it was my pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of All About HR. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you haven't done so yet, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share this episode. See you again soon for a new one. Bye.